So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and another battle replay, and it's another battle replay on the new patch, and it's going to be showcasing another updated version of another classic map. This one, of course, being CAIR ANDROS, which is the one that I thought would supersede the one on Dol Guldur, but it took a few more attempts to get a battle replay that they wanted me to show from this one, and I did actually see the second half of this one as well, so I do know how the latter stages do unfold. Something to get out of the way before we move any further though. If you notice that the quality is slightly lower in terms of the Medieval 2 settings that I'm using, it's because I have been warned, on this map anyway, to use Shader 1, because for any of you who did manage to see the battle on the Rovanian capital, the reason for the somewhat patchwork look to many of the buildings was apparently the use of Shader 2. I do hope that this isn't going to be the sort of thing which constrains too many of these new settlements, and indeed I think this one is also being fixed in this regard, because Shader version 1, there are a few things which it noticeably lacks in comparison to Shader 2, and I'd rather be using Shader 2 as and when I can, but fortunately on this map it doesn't really make too much of a difference, because many of the CAIR ANDROS assets are something which have their basis anyway in stuff that's been in the game for quite a long time. Anyway, enough of that. We will have a little look at the settlement itself before we get into some of the army compositions. Today it's going to be a fully Gondorian defence and a fully Mordor attack, so the compositions themselves will take a little bit less time to go through than they would normally. So the last version of CAIR ANDROS had kind of a similar feel to this one, in the sense that it had a big central island with 2 river crossings that the attacking armies had to take to get over to it, but this entire central island was really taken up by a settlement, and that made it one of those settlements where it was very easy for the defenders to get lost within it, and it was very difficult to cover that much ground. It was a very good map, but ultimately these kind of siege maps, you can't really blanket the entire landmass that Medieval 2 gives you, because it's simply too much room for 3 or even 4 defenders, as it is on this occasion, to be able to defend it. So this outer area, you can see that you can still defend out here, but it's going to be more of a flash in the pan kind of defence, and more about doing a little bit of damage to the attacking armies as they try to cross the river crossings and the bridges, which of course are difficult for attackers to navigate at the best of times. And then you can fall back to the first layer of the settlement here, which includes a dock. There's some varying terrain here as well, varying elevation, so the defenders can and kind of have to really take advantage of this sort of thing if they're going to get good sight lines off onto the attackers to do damage with their ranged units. There's also street-to-street combat, but by the time the defenders lose control really of this layer and it turns into those street-wide brawls, then that's the sort of thing which is going to favour the attackers, generally speaking, more so than the defenders, but we'll see how that goes on this occasion. Then you fall back to the next layer. There's another gate coming up from the docks here, which is pretty brutal for the attackers to move up, and then some standard walls which are maybe a little bit more easy for the attackers to try and poke holes in and get siege towers onto. So you can see that there's also ample room in behind here for the defenders to do damage. Kind of another layer in itself, I would suggest, are these 2 hills up to the front of this final stand gatehouse here, because there are plenty of good chokes and good positions for the defenders to use their own skirmishers. And then finally, of course, the town centre itself, which represents really what was the old keep. The very old version of CAIR ANDROS was largely just this final section of the settlement, more or less, on its own, at least in terms of size, less so in terms of layout, of course. But yeah, an interesting map to be sure. Definitely an improvement in my eyes, because it just fits the gameplay of Medieval 2 a little bit more with that slightly tighter design focus here. But yeah, also nice to see a dock land as well. We'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, who are scattered far and wide, because that's just how the deployment zones are when you've got cut off land masses like this. We'll start off with 2 times over here, playing as one of the Mordor attackers, starting off with a Troll Catapult. Troll Catapult, speed of movement is actually going to be something which could be very, very useful here. The Gondorians have got a bit of a focus around trebuchets, and considering they can simply dig into a position and start shooting at high value targets, a catapult would certainly fit the bill, but the Troll Catapult is going to be more able to cover ground and be a bit more manoeuvrable across the map. And of course the trolls themselves just add a little bit more to Mordor's overall muscle in this version of the game, which it was always considerable, and they have managed to maintain that moving into the next patch as well. Of all the factions, to be fair though, I think Mordor were least in need of an overhaul. They were very much the kind of thing that they should be anyway. Sauron's Will, armour piercing of course, is always going to be a helpful thing to have against the Gondorians. It's never going to go to waste, so if you can invest a little bit more in it, then you absolutely should, as Mordor have done here. Speaking of which, Uruk Chieftains, they've had a name change, but they're going to be exactly the same kind of unit. There are going to be better sword and board bodyguards that the game has to offer, but they certainly do the job quite nicely for Mordor's purposes. Orc Fodder, just to pad out those numbers in the Mordor army just that little bit more. It also allows you to bring maybe some more of your higher end units, which in a 4v4 siege like this, Mordor should be looking to bring a little bit more in terms of quality. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Great Shield Infantry like this is now a little bit stronger in sustained combat than they used to be. I don't know if conversely they've had their ability to push through lines reduced a little bit, I'm not sure. But one of the things that they will undoubtedly have in their favour here is a bigger shield to be dealing with the inevitable hailstorm of Gondorian projectiles coming their way. We have the Nazgul, who do actually have a slightly updated unit model themselves. You can see more elements of their armour poking through their shrouds now, but very much the same sort of thing that they always were. If you put them in and amongst the rest of the Mordor army, they are going to slowly but surely get a very impressive kill count for themselves. They also have new swords as well, I believe, which is very, very nice, slender and menacing looking. We have some Uruk infantry in here as well. One thing that has come out of the testing for the new patch, I think, is the fact that going very numbers heavy with Mordor, with basic stuff like the Uruk infantry and Uruk halberds, does tend to pay off, and that's good to see, because that should be Mordor's first plan, really, rather than going for all of the bodyguard units as they used to in the previous version of the game. One thing that they can also rely upon a little bit more now are troll drummers, although I think this is merely an officer in their unit. You can see that the troll, there is effectively a troll drummer per Uruk infantry unit. I don't believe they actually have the morale boosting effect, each of these individual troll drummers. They're more for looks than anything else, and you actually need to bring the dedicated unit to get the morale boost. I believe that's the case anyway. Morgul Chosen, again, a unit that hasn't really changed all that much since the last patch. I mean, yes, the whole game has had a few balance changes, but generally speaking, they're going to be for exactly the same job that they were before. Very heavily armoured spears, far more defensive in nature than they are offensive, but that brings about benefits of its own, considering many of the other Uruks and basic Orcs are significantly easier to kill than the Morgul Chosen. So you can have them in the middle of your line, and it makes a very hard centre to try and crack through. More Uruk infantry. We've got the Orc Javelins back here, which this kind of unit I think are always going to be fairly efficient in Reforged, based on the setup of the units and how they've moulded Medieval 2 to their liking. Excuse me. And yeah, Orc Javelins, because they're so cheap that enemy skirmishers aren't really going to want to shoot at them, but if you don't do anything in that regard, their javelins can really rack up a hefty kill count, especially against armoured targets, as we may learn here. We'll have to wait and see. The Temple Guard with their steel bows, they will be, again, another very fine unit to bring against the Gondorians, albeit the Gondorians can mitigate their effectiveness somewhat by using their own settlement to good effect. Uruk infantry, we also have the Olag High over here, bringing some more troll muscle, albeit this time in more dedicated form than the catapult crew in front of them. And last but by no means least, we have the Temple Executioners, clad in their upgraded armour as they are. Very fine unit of heavy swordsmen, as they will always be, which is where the general is as well. One of the Nazgûl separate from his brethren on this occasion. Now then, moving on to Tommy the Wise, another Mordor attacking army. We have some Morgul Chosen. We'll go through this army a little bit quicker until we run into some newer units. Some Uruk infantry, several of them pushing the siege towers into position. We've also got the Orc Fodder, 2 units of them pushing up rams as well. We can see the Gondorians waiting for Tommy's army in the distance though, so he's not going to have a completely clean run across that bridge and that river crossing. Olag High, we have some Blackguard of Barad-dûr carrying some ladders. Some Sauron's Will carrying some ladders as well. Unshielded as they are, they will be a juicy target for the Gondorians. Uruk Chieftains are here also. Temple Executioners, Temple Guard and Nazgûl, unsurprising. And then there's some Orc Javelins over on the other side, but Rangers have been changed, of course, in this version of the game, as we have already seen in the other battles that we have shown of the new patch. The Ardenheim Shadowbows, therefore, have lost their body-piercing projectiles, but Rangers have got better range and far better base damage than many other of the more defensive archers that the game has to offer. We'll see. I mean, Ardenheim Shadowbows were always slightly tankier than their other rangers in the game, but Yeah, I mean, high damage but lower defense priority archers for attackers going to be slightly more difficult to use, but if you can get them into the right position, they can still be very deadly, especially given that the Gondorians, to really use archers effectively against them, you will need better base damage to crack through the armor and shield values that they have. And last but by no means least, the Beasts of Gorgoroth. I know, based on what I've seen and what I've used of the Beasts of Gorgoroth in this new patch, is that they have been made substantially better, which bodes well for the fate of monstrous units in general in Reforged. In the last patch of the game, of course, stuff like the Mumakil and especially the Beasts of Gorgoroth were really very disappointing in terms of what they would offer you. That is not the case anymore, so much so that the Beasts of Gorgoroth can be viable for Mordor to bring when they're on the attack in a siege to use as living battering rams. Yes, they will still fall away if you commit them into the wrong kind of fight, but they have enough survivability to the point where Mordor have got another shock and awe kind of tool that they can use in addition to stuff like Olag High and Blackguard of Barad-dûr, which can make Mordor a terrifying force when they get going, but I'm sure we will see the beasts in action as the battle goes on. Next we have Froggy. Interesting that we didn't see the Uruk archers or the Uruk halberds in the other armies, but here they are nonetheless. Basic archers. Again, the Gondorians are very well suited for a kind of skirmish fight against Mordor, but having said that, the Uruk archers themselves are not exactly the kind of target that the Gondorian archers will want to be tangling with over the long haul, and the Uruk halberds likewise are the sort of unit which can engage in that grueling fight with the Gondorians better than most, perhaps simply because of that phalanx formation that they have. Sauron's Will, Morgul Chosen, more Uruk halberds, ladder in front of them as well. We've got the Temple Guard, we've got another Troll Catapult, so plenty of artillery, Temple Executioners, Olag High, Uruk Chieftains, elite units pushing up the siege towers on this side, Orc Javelins, and, well, 3 units of Orc Javelins, so big investment, but like I said, Orc Javelins are a very efficient kind of unit, and another unit of the Beasts of Gorgoroth. And finally, for Mordor, we have, actually no, this is more Froggy's army, we've got some, some Blackguard of Barad-dûr, some Morgul Chosen, and some Uruk archers. Now we have the final Mordor army under the command of Eclipse 2500. We have got some Morgul Chosen. I believe Eclipse, at the very least, had a helping hand in this map. I believe. Anyway, he's the one that's been trying to get this replay to me for a long time, and we're seeing it from his perspective today. Morgul Chosen, we've got some Uruk infantry in there pulling up a ladder. More Uruk infantry. We have not the dedicated troll drummers, but we do have Olag High. We have plenty of Uruk infantry. We've got Temple Guard, again pulling off all of those Mordor crafted ladders. We have Temple Executioners in here, interestingly enough, with black swords, which is rather interesting. It kind of makes them stand out on the field, I suppose, but the upgraded variant of them doesn't have it. More Uruk infantry, so a very numbers heavy army this, which is good to see. It does mean that Mordor are varying their strengths. Orc Javelins, plenty of them. Uruk Chieftains, another artillery piece as well with the Trolls. Another unit of Nazgûl, which is unsurprising given their effectiveness. And yet another unit of Beasts of Gorgoroth. So 3 of the units of Beasts on the field today. Going to be scary times indeed for the Gondorians, but at least there are 4 of them on the defence today. Starting off with Tundra's Fox. We've got some Gondorian infantry here. Basic though they may be, they should do fine against some of the more basic Uruks, and they do represent a decent bedrock for the Gondorians to utilise, but it is going to be other units that are going to need to slay the beasts and the trolls that Mordor have brought with them today, but at the very least a decent line holder there. We have some Guards of Osgiliath. One thing that Mordor do not have access to is pikes, so keeping the enemy at very long range could be absolutely vital for Gondor's chances of holding on to their fortress here today. Got some cavalry in behind, a good opportunity to see some of the more regular units of cavalry utilised today. I don't know whether CAIR ANDROS is fertile terrain for the Pinnith Galens to really showcase their strengths. I mean, there is room, but given the fact that Mordor have got trolls and halberds and also the beasts which can more easily catch them, especially with javelin fire as well, I don't know. But if they can clatter into some juicy lumps of Mordor infantry, that will result in a lot of kills. Veterans of Osgiliath, so we can see there the slightly armour-clad and slightly battered and bruised veterans up here on the hill. Primarily a defensive archer, but they're high tier enough that they can still do a decent amount of damage, and then of course when all is said and done they turn into pretty damn good sword and board infantry units as well, so that's going to be a fixture behind this battle as well. The Gondorian heavy archers are going to need to pull their weight in melee as well as at range. Pelagia Marines, Javelins on the defence in a fortress are going to be slightly easier to use in theory because you can force the attackers into taking certain routes, so we'll see if the Pelagias can be used to that effect. We have some Axemen of Lasarnak, again a completely unsurprising pick with the armour upgrades as they are here, purely because those armour piercing attacks are going to be useful against Mordor as much as armour piercing is good against Gondor. The same can also be said against Mordor. We have some Athelian Rangers in here. You can see that they have the slightly bulkier look that the Wardens of Minas Ithil used to have. The same thing applies to the Athelian Rangers as applies to the Ardenheim Shadowbows. No body piercing anymore, so they will no longer be a crutch for the defenders to rely upon. But very high base damage, very high range as well, so if they can target down the right kinds of units, they can really shred them still. But numbers of kills are no longer the thing that Rangers will be renowned for. I think it's more going to be the sharp shooting of high value targets. Not too dissimilar to armor piercing archers, but maybe in a more general sense than that. Gondorian spearmen as well, very similar to the infantry that we've already seen. They're going to be used primarily as a line holding unit. They won't be as good at dealing damage, but actually holding those lines, these spears are probably better suited for it due to the general strengths that spears have. More Gondor infantry, we've got more Pelagia Marines as well. We have the Vanguard of King Elisar making their triumphant return to the Gondorian roster as well as another bodyguard tier heavy swordsman that the Gondorians can utilise, with a new model to boot as well, with slightly more Aragorn coronation look to them. And obviously heavy swordsmen are going to be very good against basic orcs, and not many of the Mordor roster are going to want to tangle with them one-to-one. Some more Gondor infantry. We've got the Fountain Guard here again with their capes. The Fountain Guard have always been a stalwart of the Gondorian roster, and that most certainly will not be changing with this version of the game as well. Fantastic line holders. Axemen of Lasarnak with some damage. Guards of Osgiliath add in men, another Gondor player today. And moving back, we have the fully upgraded Gondor infantry as well, so they're going to be a little bit more resilient. Interesting to see Tundra's Fox foregoing that upgrade. I would assume that Gondor are still intended to have slightly more easy access to these upgrades. More Gondor infantry, also fully upgraded Gondor spearmen, so again going to be reaping the benefits of that armour upgrade there. Mevin also a defender today with more Gondor spearmen, more Gondor infantry, plenty of the rank and file down here, ready to hold the line with the Guards of Osgiliath. And maybe they'll be hoping that units such as the Veterans of Osgiliath with the armour upgrades here up on the walls will be able to do the business. Further down we've got more Axemen, more, actually no, this is the Nimlothian Honour Guard. So you can see they've also had a little bit of an update as well. Their shields have been given a bit of a makeover. They've also been given slightly different helms and also a pure white cape as well. But again, obviously a standout infantry unit from the Gondorian roster. Fountain Guard, Gondor infantry, Axemen, very much the same sort of thing down here. Gondor infantry. The trebuchets are going to be a fixture for the Gondorian defence here. They will need to be. And indeed the splash damage they can cause is very substantial. The Pelagia Marines ready to fire their javelins down into the dock area should the need arise. So we make our way back. Plenty of the Gondorians today. It does make a real difference having one less attacker and one more defender. Gondor infantry are here. Another trebuchet in the background there from Mevin. I know that Sin is on the defence as well. We've got more Pelagia Marines, more Fountain Guard, Gondor Spearmen. The Citadel Guard here. So we saw them in the last battle actually draw swords in melee, so I'll be interested to see if they do that once again today, the slightly more elite spears that the Gondorians utilise. More Pelagias, more Fountain Guard, another unit of Citadel Guard as well. And then here up we have finally Sin of the Dark Cloud's army with Gondor Spearmen here, with some fully upgraded Veterans of Osgiliath in the distance, plenty more Axemen of Lasarnak. We've got Fountain Guard, we've got Pelagia Marines, more Vanguard of King Elisar at the head of this army, Nimlothians as well, and a trebuchet crew. You can see the Gondorians' reliance more so on their rank and file here, which is unsurprising given the fact they're going to have less funds to play with in a 4v4 and they're on the defence. Two Athelian Rangers in a pretty nasty position, and no one's in the town centre just yet, but we will be seeing every facet of this settlement used today, which is good to see. I will be making a cut though, because it is going to take the attackers a little while to start transitioning across the rivers, I think. We may see this area of the battlefield erupt into conflict first, however, so we'll wait and see on that one, and I'll make a cut and rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So I think we shall rejoin here. There has been a couple of things that have occurred, but they've been rather sporadic and they weren't really worth rejoining the battle for until now. But the Saurons will, interestingly enough, still pushing the Ram, which is weird actually that the Gondorians are not doing something more to try and target them down, because they are a very worthy target for any sort of ranged units you may perceive. There is a hole in this wall, and just in behind, this is one example of some of the Gondorians that have died. Only Gondorians have died up until this point, I believe, with one of the catapult shots when the wall crumbled going through there. The other thing that did happen as well was the Beasts of Gorgoroth came forward and skirmished down a clutch of guards of Osgiliath here. So some valuable pikemen, really the victims of the rather shaky wisdom that led to the Gondorians deploying some of their men outside the walls, only covering one side of the island. So I'm not really sure why they were doing that in the first place, but they have ended up suffering as a result of that. And the Beasts of Gorgoroth coming in once again, unsupported for the time being, but the javelins proving to be very useful as well. So still the Gondorians under pressure, and I mean there's not really much they can do if the Beasts of Gorgoroth decide to charge in and then quickly leave again, but the beasts themselves do still need to be fairly careful, because as much as they are significantly stronger than they used to be, if they get caught alone against a lot of Gondor's anti-cavalry / anti-monster units, they will be in a good deal of trouble and get burnt down rather quickly. But that can be said of quite a few of Mordor's really high-end things like Nazgul. If they're part of a combined assault, they can be exceptionally powerful, but they need to be careful here. The Gondorians themselves need to maybe organise themselves a little bit better than this, I have to say, because so far they're getting bullied and poked around the settlements a little bit too easily by individual Mordor units, and in particular the beasts have proven so far to be very, very effective. A taste of what is to come from this kind of unit. Definitely not the sort of thing that can be taken lightly, but that is how it should be. They're very expensive. The Gondorians now, spearmen are here, and also the Fountain Guard, the sort of thing which in melee is going to be pretty deadly. But still the javelins coming in. Those armour-piercing missiles will be doing the business against the Gondorian foot soldiers. Osgiliath in position, and still the Beasts of Gorgoroth move forward. It is interesting to note that Mordor are using them largely on their own at this point. I mean, they haven't lost any of them, but they will still be taking damage at the hands of spearmen and the like. So far, Gondor have not elected to use any missiles themselves on them either. Uruk archers and Orc javelins doing their best to skirmish into the Gondorian positions as well. And with the gates down and with a hole in the wall, this isn't the most solid ground for Gondor to be making a stand in. And the other areas, you can see Morgul Chosen getting knocked over by their own beasts. They've got a lot more room here. That obviously devastating there from the trebuchet, so electing to loiter around in a big blob for too long and met 4 of the beasts dying, as well as a large proportion of that Morgul Chosen unit. So instantly, really, Gondor have a ton of value, and that's exactly the sort of thing that artillery can provide to you. In the trebuchet, in an ideal position here to shoot just over the walls because of the trajectory of the projectiles, so they themselves are protected from any sort of counter artillery fire, whilst being close enough to the action to get easier hits. Though no such artillery support is going to be forthcoming for Gondor in this part of the settlement. Indeed, the Mordor catapult continues to peel away Gondor's fortifications here in the outer sections of the settlement. Penethgalans moving forward here and charging in, although only one of the Penethgalan riders has fallen, but doesn't look like they've actually done any damage to the Orc fodder that are in the vanguard there. Another section of wall falls. The Beasts of Gorgoroth over here as well, albeit it looks as though they are going to be part of a more combined offensive. There are some Pelargia Marines in the docks as well, but nothing else really. It doesn't look like Gondor are going to be too eager to hold this lowest section of the city. But Mordor will have to traverse it in order to pressurise the second layer with all they have, and that means the Gondorians can hit them from the side up on this layer, provided they can hold on to it. Beast of Gorgoroth is still here. The guards of Osgiliath are wavering, and still it's been Mordor's javelins, both on the beasts and on foot, have been making Gondor's life more difficult in setting up over here. We do have a melee engagement now though, with some infantry units from Mordor making their way into the settlement, but this was the slightly damaged unit of Morgul chosen. The Temple Guard are here as well. This is an interesting choice. I mean, the Temple Guard, primarily you'd want to use them for their arrows first and foremost, and steel bows, but they are also a fairly domineering melee unit against the more basic foot soldiers of Gondor, so Gondor infantry will be easily mopped up, and this will allow them to utilise their ammunition more effectively later on. More javelins over here as well. The gate's closed. What's going on here? I'm assuming that that's a way, just a door that isn't marked clearly, but getting down off the wall, so more orc javelins in place. The gate's still very much up. No ram? Cliff's going to have to make do without a ram, but that's not the worst thing in the world. He is going to need to send forward more reinforcements here though. The Temple Guard are strong, but Gondor themselves are now sending forward armour-piercing axemen and the far more impressive Fountain Guard to back up their basic infantry, and that's going to be exactly the sort of thing which will lead to trouble for the Temple Guard, and the Gondor infantry actually trying to hunt them down in melee. Although the Gondorians are also now pulling back with their better units as well, so it's been a bit of a bizarre fight so far over here. The first forays into combat. Mordor's infantry now also pouring in through the gates, so with two gaps in the wall Gondor have had to pull back over there, and also with streets and alleyways that can be exploited, Gondor are going to have many angles they're going to need to defend. A combination of the very solid Morgul chosen with the more damaging Sauron's will is a winning combination, especially against something like regular Gondor infantry, and already Gondor find themselves struggling here. Their rank and file units are reasonably efficient, but not against this kind of opposition, and sending them alone into these kinds of fights is going to end with Gondor hemorrhaging their manpower, so they're going to need to improve themselves if they are to have a chance of victory here. Gondor infantry moving forward. Ooh, attacking artillery, that'll be the last thing the Gondorians need. A few of the Gondor infantrymen there falling to the javelin volley, but Froggy with many things to concentrate on. They are going to get closed down in melee. Going to quickly scurry away now though, with Uruk halberds taking their position in the fight. Another thing which the regular Gondorians are not going to be too thrilled about. Large Mordor force now moving in here with beasts and with trolls. The Pinnith Galans are going to have to retreat in the face of such things, but they are in full view of the Gondorian archers here, the Athelian Rangers, the Pelagia Marines as well, so hoping to give Mordor a taste of their own medicine with regards to javelins so far in this fight. That's exactly what they're going to be doing against some pretty high-end units as well with Temple Guard. There's also the very damaging Ardenaim shadow bows though, and you can see that Mordor once again are going to be trying to whittle down this front line. Gondor infantry, however, taking the brunt of this damage. They will be hoping to give the appropriate cover to the guards of Osgiliath, which are in there as well. There's also the vanguard of King Elisar at the back, so this is a solid front line. It's not the sort of thing which Mordor can hope to bludgeon their way through with ease. Over here though, Mordor could be attacking that front line from the rear sooner than Gondor would like. There are guards of Osgiliath in here now, which should make the Uruk halberds job that much harder, but there's Uruk chieftains in there as well. Good amount of armour piercing, and so that plate armour from Gondor is not going to be quite as effective as they would maybe like. Another troll drummers. There's one of the officers in the unit. Gondor reinforcing themselves more over here with some more Gondor infantry, but it's not going to be enough with trolls and Sauron's will relying on these basic units still. All they're going to be doing really is buying time, but buying time for what exactly? The only range support coming in here is from Mordor. Sending more units in doesn't really seem like the best idea to me, but they may not have a choice, because if one front line falls, the others will surely follow in a domino effect, so the Gondorians are going to have to try and do something to reverse the tide in some of those engagements. The armour-piercing axemen will be just the thing to deal with stuff like Morgul Chosen, but they themselves will have to rely on their own armour to keep them alive. Heavy axemen without the higher melee defense values of their sword-wielding counterparts. The Gondorian line over here is looking a little bit more solid, and I do think that they will start to do a decent job against Mordor there, but it is over in this part of the settlement that I do worry for the Gondorians. The Beasts of Gorgoroth forcing their way through the lines over here, and already you can see with the Blackguard of Barad-dûr trying to push through as well. I mean, this could be punishing for Mordor, but now that Tommy has decided to go about things in this way, Mordor do have to go all in on it somewhat. Very violent affair indeed. Orc fodder and Morgul chosen. The two ends of the spear spectrum for Mordor also at the heart of this. I mean, you can see the Blackguard of Barad-dûr pushing forward. Getting in and amongst the Axemen now, though, they will start to struggle, but in conjunction with those Olag Kai and the Beasts of Gorgoroth, that really is a heavy metal Mordor advance that's difficult to stop, but it is a rather all-in thing, like I said. So we'll see how it goes. Certainly in the earlier stages of this battle, as it's got underway, though, you would definitely give a distinct edge to Mordor. The Gondorians have been scrambling a little bit to try and set up their defences, and for the most part, I would say that there's room for improvement. This one over here is still reasonably solid, but Uruk chieftains making their way to the front line now will give Mordor the quality that they need in the face of the Axemen of Lasarnak. Over here, Orc javelins. Not a huge amount of ranged firepower being utilised by Gondor at this point in time, though, so maybe for the second layer they can make Mordor pay, but I mean, they're going to need to if they're going to have any chance in this battle, because Mordor have been fairly domineering in the early stages of this one, but it is what it is. And those Beasts of Gorgoroth are now running roughshod all over the back of the settlement. This is actually similar to the battle that I played in, where when this layer started to fall, getting the Beasts of Gorgoroth and trolls in behind enemy lines to go after stuff that was exposed and trying to retreat was one of the main tactics utilised in this section. One of these transitional phases always tend to favour the attackers, and with units like the Beasts and Olag Kai, you are in a very good position to take advantage of this sort of thing as Mordor. And Gondor have managed to stabilise this front line a little bit. They're still losing it, but they have actually managed to halt Mordor's momentum a little bit, and that does go to show that Gondor do have resilience, because there are factions that would have crumbled in the face of such a force. Olag's getting in behind this front line over here surely will not last too much longer now. Uruk chieftains and halberds from the front, and now some trolls also from the back, so yeah, these Gondor spearmen are surely not long for this world. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, second unit of them coming in. And some of the cut-off Gondorians already killed. The background, the Troll Catapult crew, moving forward with their artillery pieces. The Pelagia Marines are here, but not exactly going to be up to the task of killing even basic trolls in melee. They would have to be reliant really upon their javelins for such things. Some temple executioners nearby as well, so yeah, unsurprisingly they rout. The beasts looming in the distance. Oof. That was quite fortunate actually for Mordor. That could have hit centre mass at these Uruk archers, but instead it only took the heads off 3 of them. Yeah, you'd definitely give Mordor a distinct edge after the initial plays on this one. Blackguard of Barad-dûr starting to pile in through the gatehouse. So as Gondor retreat, the gates actually remain open, although this is a situation where the gates may very well slam shut again if the Gondorians manage to get all of their units behind it, and that would cut off the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. And I would say as well that we saw the Blackguard used very well on the other front line as the vanguard as part of a push that was ready to go, but I think Mordor might be getting a little bit ahead of themselves here. They don't seem to have the manpower close by to really take advantage of the fact that the Blackguard are in here. It may just be an effort of Mordor to try and keep the gate open without the need for a ram, but yeah, I don't know. Something that Gondor can take advantage of, killing off another of these pesky Great Shield units so that their front lines are a little bit more secure. Gondor Spearmen doing their thing. Also Fountain Guard as well. Flaming Shots. What's this? Athelian Rangers. Are they going to be able to... So I assume they're going to be able to get up there again. There's probably some doors that are not marked clearly once again, because I can't see how the Athelian Rangers get down from here. This is a wall, so you could jump off there in reality, of course, but in Medieval 2 mechanics you cannot. There's still some Gondorians that are trying to flee, and it's they're not going to be able to get away, unfortunately for them. They are doomed. Eclipse 2500 now trying to get through the walls. And again, you can see Mabin's Trebuchet is in a nasty position here to simply shoot directly over the wall. There's no amazing targets to go after for the time being, but it'll be fine. And those Blackguard have been dealt with. There's a few units in front of the gate as well. Morgul chosen. It says victory seems certain for them. They do outnumber the Axemen, but kind of incidental, but you would still give the Axemen a bit of an edge here, given the ideal nature of the kind of unit they are facing off against. Another thud from the catapult in the background as Uruk Halberd start making their way forward with a bit of support. The Axemen will be overcome pretty quickly, however. And there's also the small matter of the large force which has passed through the docks and still in the, well, is passing through the docks. And largely untouched as well, which is a little bit of a concern for Gondor. They weren't really able to shoot into the sides of these units passing through here from the walls up here as much as they would like, because they started losing ground faster than would have been ideal. Trebuchet. Incidental hits on the Uruk Halberds. And there go the Axemen of the Sarnak, routing in the face of overwhelming force. Morgul chosen hanging around. Citadel Guard here as well. You can see them with their swords out. This is something that will be changed, so they only use their spears again. That secondary weapon mechanic that Med 2 has is something that you only really see with archers in Third Age and other similar mods. Well, decent hits here coming in from the Trebuchet. It's only on Uruk infantry, but still inflicting some decent losses. Exactly the sort of thing which Gondor will need more of if they are to start turning this one around. Sauron's will, they're not yet ready to completely begin their assault anew. Citadel Guard. There were some javelins forthcoming. Meanwhile, again pushing into the gatehouse, preventing the gate from being shut now. Morgul chosen, but they are shaken. I mean, this isn't going to end too well for them. Even if the Axemen of the Sarnak make for a scarier foe than the standard Gondor infantry, the numbers are such that the Gondor infantry will be absolutely fine. They'll do their damage pretty slowly though. That's all the Morgul chosen really need to be doing at this point, as all their allies get ready for a renewed effort. Victory seems certain. To your spears as well, that V-shaped formation. The gates that lead down to the docks smashed down. The Gondorians presumably are ready enough, and indeed there are some infantry and spears ready to receive the attackers, but I'm surprised actually they're not making more of an effort to defend over here, because they could get some really nice crossfire on both sides with archers, but electing not to do that, I'm not sure letting them in and giving them more room to work with is necessarily the best idea though. Want to be making the battlefield as small as possible as defenders, and Mordor, especially with their numbers, are going to be wanting to spread out as much as they can. It's a minor thing, but it's still something that Mordor would prefer. Uruk infantry are shaken instantly as a result of those fire arrows. Bit of friendly fire coming in as well. There can be no doubt about it when you see some of the Gondorians being immolated. They're moving in now. They are starting to move forward with more units at the very least, as the fully armoured Gondorians continue to hold the line over here, with the Morgul Chosen being backed up once again by Uruk halberds, and also some Uruk infantry, although they rout with instant effect. Over 100 of them as well. Morale is one weapon that the Gondorians can certainly use to turn this fight around. The basic Mordor orcs are very likely to flee for the hills under extreme duress. Meanwhile, Eclipse moving in with some of his units. Orc javelins and Uruk infantry struggling again. I think it's down to that morale. Some Wardens of the White Tower, you know, Veterans of Osgiliath. I don't know if I'm a massive fan of the Veterans of Osgiliath being given the Wardens of the White Tower model in melee. I think it's a little bit ostentatious for them, but... another Evendim Spear-like situation, where the armour upgrade is maybe a step too far visually, in terms of what they actually are meant to be. I don't know. Meanwhile, the Troll Catapult crew coming in here trying to help with the infantry assault. It's still mostly just basic Gondorian infantry and spearmen which are here, and basic Troll Catapult crews as well. Will do a decent job against this kind of unit. Still the arrow fire continues. Ooh. I heard a artillery shot there. Citadel Guard still up on the walls, still the Gondorians covering this gap, and the Uruks trying to force their way through. The halberds will do pretty well if they can get situated against this kind of unit, but for now the Gondorians basically a living part of the wall. And over here, yeah, these flaming arrows will be just the thing against orc fodder and the like. Not the most important unit to see running for the hills, but it does deprive Mordor of more of their numbers, and getting rid of hundreds of orcs at a time is how Gondor are going to have to equip themselves. Although I did notice there were Nazgul in here as well, so Nazgul doing exactly what they should be doing, embedding themselves in and amongst the basic orcs to drastically improve the performance of the front line. There are Fountain Guard moving in now though to meet the challenge of the Nazgul, so both sides using more of their rank and file units with one unit of genuine quality in and amongst them, so parity between the two sides over here. But the javelins of the orcs and the fire arrows of the Gondorians are the real weapons that are being utilised here, really. And still, oof, that's dead Olag High at the hands of the catapult. There's also rotting meat being utilised. So the artillery starting to play an ever more important role in this one, as the Gondorians continue to fight on the front line. I mean, they will be suffering at the hands of these Olag High, even with some of their number being killed by a trebuchet shot. Some of the officers with Zweihanders, but many of them, a shield is all well and good, but it's not going to stop a blow from one of those giant clubs and hammers. A fight for the gate as well. There are some Sauron's Will moving in alongside the Uruk halberds. A lot of this armour piercing will be good when it connects with the Gondorians, but so far the Gondorians have done really rather well. To keep the numbers in their favour in these particular fights. Mordor may be thinking about moving in. A few javelins coming in from the Citadel Guard. Will be nasty hits and trying to tear down the numbers of the Black Guard of Barad-dûr a little bit to prevent the inevitable mass push which is going to be on the way. And another hit there from the trebuchet just in behind the walls, shaken now, the Uruk infantry getting up onto the walls. Meanwhile, a fight for the walls taking place as the veterans of Osgiliath start to fight against their fellow ranged unit in the Uruk archers, but the veterans of course have got a huge advantage there, though not so against Temple Guard. And Temple Guard are in a nasty place themselves now. They'll be able to use their steel bows to very good effect, but there you can see they could break the wall here, could the Gondorians, and it would be a bit of friendly fire. Very unfortunate there into the Axeman with the Sarnak, but you can see here artillery proving to be the kingmaker in this battle now. Mordor could very well end up losing that entire unit of Temple Guard if the wall crumbles. All it's going to take is one more hit from that trebuchet, and crumbling their own fortifications, and there we go. Very, very nice. Very high-end unit there. Completely crippled, and those Uruk archers will be going the same way as the veterans clean them up in melee, and the Mordor assault over here is also stuttering as well, so... And a general falls. Mordor definitely had the better of the first layer, but this second layer has been extremely painful for them and has brought the battle back into parity. Gondorians doing very well. Uruk infantry there. I mean, it's no surprise that Gondor's performance in this battle has increased exponentially as the artillery and archers they have at their disposal have taken a more active role in this fight. The Morgul chosen defeat seems certain. The announcer still fancies Mordor's chances and the numbers Mordor have at their disposal, and also many of the units which have quite a few hit points as well, like Nazgul. The beasts that still remain and any trolls that still remain do have a pretty profound effect on balance of power and the like. And Mordor now trying to bludgeon their way through. Was this the time to do so though? Because they're right in view of their artillery. They're going to try and use the siege tower, I believe, to actually block the artillery shots, which is a pretty decent idea in all fairness, because it does allow Mordor to continue to try and be aggressive in this situation. But oof, very, very lucky actually that they did bring the siege tower forward there. Maybe, well, lucky's the wrong word. Good judgment. Luck was involved with the timing, I suppose, with that, but Mordor starting to push the Gondorian front lines back a little bit now, but this is a sensitive point of the battle, because if Gondor can really use their artillery to its fullest, you will end up seeing a lot of death on the Mordor side, a lot of routing on the Mordor side, and then going into the later stages of the battle it will give Gondor the best possible chance at winning. A little bit of friendly fire, but mostly hitting Mordor orcs, and that's going to end up with them routing. Also support coming in from the Pelagian Marines just to really twist the knife. Lots of damage there. Gondorian infantry. Flaming shot still being used. That's definitely an artillery hit. A pile of crispy trolls. But the Blackguard of Barad-dûr now moving forward, and this is going to be a bit of a problem for the Gondorians. This Axeman of the Sarnak unit is the only thing left holding back the tide. They're going to try and scramble forward now, but it's a little bit too little too late, and this could end up being the domino effect that Mordor have been waiting for. They're going to be able to push through with their Blackguard. The army that was down in the docks was also in by far the best condition, so as much as Eclipse and Froggy have taken pretty grievous wounds in this phase of the battle, Two Times has got a far more healthy army that he can still commit forward. And now he's also going to be able to come in from the side and assist in this frontal assault. Beasts of Gorgoroth that are still alive, trying to mulch their way through. This kind of brute force assault is exactly how Mordor claimed a hefty advantage in the first layer, and they're now trying to repeat it, though they do have less of these kinds of units at their disposal now, but still enough trolls and beasts in order to be able to enact it. Javelins coming in. Again, the momentum is with Mordor, but they are going to be taking heavy losses as they march forward. Every inch of ground paid for with blood. The siege tower definitely doing its work. 27% damage. Beasts of Gorgoroth have got those melee attacks that most monstrous units have as well, although they do need to be careful here because they're going to be taking damage, and indeed they're starting to fall now. If they're in sustained melee like this without moving, that is where the beasts can come unstuck. Uruk chieftains as well though. The Gondorians that still remain over here are steadily getting surrounded, and all of the gains that they made are going to be slowly reversed by the attackers, especially with Nazgul also getting involved. All of Mordor's heavy hitters. Gondor setting up another front line over here. Citadel Guard, Fountain Guard. I don't know if the Citadel Guard with their swords have got armour-piercing attacks. I'm not sure. More javelins, Morgul chosen. This is more of just a standard front line. Mordor won't be looking to put too much pressure on it for the time being, but it is engaged. Some routing going on as well, but from the least important of Mordor's army. Temple Executioners on the way forwards to support. And again, it's one of those transitional phases which I don't know if the Gondorians are going to come out of in good enough shape to make a fist of this battle moving forward. Still the Nazgul. I think the armour additions to the Nazgul and their new swords add a lot to them. They had, after all, had the same model ever since Vanilla Third Age. Trebuchet. Causing the routing of yet more of Mordor's most unimportant units, but it's still all important numbers which Mordor are being denied, and I think we are starting to see a retreat now. Olag High trying to get after this trebuchet. The trebuchet, I think, has probably already paid for itself, but I think the Gondorians do need it to do more than simply paying for itself. I think it needs an exceptional performance from here. The trolls going after them, the Pinnith Galans can act as a good rearguard here actually. The cavalry hasn't really been terribly effective thus far, but they do have their use now. They can act as a good cover, and important infantry for the final stand from Gondor can be saved by the green-clad riders. As the rest of the Gondorians leave, still this front line still stands. I mean, there are Citadel and Fountain Guard as part of it, so it's not too surprising. What remains of the Gondorian infantry from here is going to be a stiff challenge for Mordor. And the Olags doing business. Athelian Rangers. This would be a situation in the old patch where these Athelian Rangers would be turning back the tide all on their own with those body-piercing projectiles they used to have, but no longer. But this is still a situation in which they're going to be getting a lot of kills purely because of that high damage they have. In comes the Troll Catapult crew, and that's surely going to be the final collapse of this Gondorian position over here. Forwards come the Uruk infantry. Still artillery doing its thing. Against Uruk archers though, is that a worthy target? I don't know. Not for me. Gondorians... I mean, the trebuchet presumably still has ammunition, otherwise Gondor wouldn't be taking great pains to save it from this Mordor pursuit. Nazgul in amongst here, finishing off some of the stragglers from these Gondor infantry units that are still making their way up the hill as everyone turns around from a Gondorian standpoint to meet the Mordor challenge. Citadel Guard with those swords again. It's the sort of thing which may very well be crippling their ability to be as effective as they could be in melee, but at the very least their defensive values are such that they will still make a good line-holding unit, which is what they need to be in this situation. Fountain Guard and Gondor infantry fighting by their side as well. The trebuchet, if it does still have ammunition, this is... I mean, they'd have to go through their own men, so it's a little bit risky to use the trebuchet here, but they may not have a choice. They may have to simply take that risk. With the battle as it has gone so far, the Gondorians still have hope in this one, but Mordor certainly will feel the more comfortable of the two going into the latter stages. Just in behind Temple Executioners, they've seen battle. Only 26 of them remain. And the Trebuchet thinks better of it, which is probably for the best. If you get friendly fire in this situation, it's a genuine disaster. Very similar situation happening over here, albeit Gondor do have easier access to a position where they can support their allies. Temple Guard and Athenian Rangers trading blow for blow. Sin's Trebuchet. Is that going to be the answer? The angle's still kind of awkward for the Trebuchet to be used as the Gondorians may like, as much as the Trebuchets have been really the saving grace of Gondor so far in this battle. Can't afford to be too gung-ho with it. Once again, Mordor's javelins are the things causing the Gondorian lines grief. The Olakai probably not enjoying this fight too much, indeed several of them falling away fairly fast in the face of Fountain Guard and Axemen of Lasarnak, two of the units which will be better at dealing with the Ologs than many of the other Gondorians we've seen try to take them on in this battle thus far. As they scamper away, the Athelian Rangers. 30 Uruk infantry moving in. I mean, the Mordor are actually, losing steam in this engagement. They actually do need some reinforcements, and that isn't going to happen, I don't think. You can see the infantry fleeing. The trolls still stand. They won't run away, but they will die more quickly without the support of their orcish underlings propping up the assault. Indeed, it really is only the Ologs that remain. Let's see. So Mordor having to go through narrower chokes now, which Gondor can clog up with their heavy infantry and make any sort of advance more difficult. The only thing is, if Gondor are really going to make this work, they are going to need their units in support to be the ones to do the business. And thus far, you have to say, once again, it's been the Orc Javelins that have actually been maybe the more effective supporting unit used. They're not doing tons and tons of damage, but this is all going to add up in the long run, you would suggest. And they're trying to utilise the ladders here, and actually they are sweeping the Gondorians aside. So they do drop the ladders now, but not before putting some not insignificant dents in the Gondorian line, and they pick the ladders back up. And they're going to try and do the same thing. I mean, technically speaking, this isn't even as ridiculous as it may seem. If you use these long ladders, you could use them, in theory, like long spears, or trying to push the enemy lines back. You have seen this before with catapults that are out of ammunition being used, and with siege towers, so I think this is the first time I've ever seen it with ladders, however. As bizarre as it may be, it has given Mordor a few gaps that they can exploit against the Gondorian lines here. And here you can see the Trebuchet is actually absorbing a fair amount of the javelin fire which Mordor are trying to inflict upon the Gondorians. Sauron's Will now rushing forwards as well. Trebuchet in the background there starting to fire. Yes, armour-piercing damage. The Nazgul are here. Once again, if you look at the Gondorian defenders, against the kind of forces that Mordor are bringing to bear, regular Gondor infantry is going to struggle. It can hold for a decent amount of time, but Gondor are going to need some genuine damage dealers here. Athenian Rangers as well, Rangers with decent melee defense in melee, but not necessarily the damage that you need to be seeing. Meanwhile, the Trebuchets of Sin, a couple of them there, grazing blows on the Uruk infantry only, but it's the sort of thing which will worry Mordor, having to go through the Axemen of Lasarnak, which still stand, still swinging their two-handed axes. And then the Temple Guard, Morgul chosen, so there are still some of the forces that were in the docks which can be committed forwards. Mordor still have decent assault left in them. Do Gondor have the ability to withstand such a thing? I'm not sure. Kind of depends on the ammunition they have left and what sort of position they can occupy, I think. because their regular rank and file, which still represent a decent proportion of their melee combatants, are not going to be enough on their own. And now forward come another unit of Blackguard of Barad-dûr to try and really break the back of this defensive position over here. The balance of forces is evenly matched. Defeat also a distinct possibility. Yeah, the Blackguard, I mean, with Gondor struggling a little bit more, they can come in here, a charge from the Axemen of Lasarnak, that armour-piercing damage will make the Blackguard regret pushing this far perhaps, but the damage has already been done over here. A little bit further back, 21 Pelagia Marines, probably not the heroes that Gondor need to be calling upon. I believe, yes, they have got men ready for the final stand, so Gondor already making their choice for the future. There goes a Gondorian general. Trebuchet crew. Still firing away, firing with rotting meat, but I think at this stage, as much as Gondor may very well have been using morale as a weapon, especially in that second layer, they need to be a little bit careful here, because as the situation gets away from them a little bit and Mordor claim momentum once more, Gondor's morale is not impervious, and stuff like a rotting meat volley or some fire arrows that go astray could end up... you could end up routing your own troops as a result of that. In come the Pinnith Galans, once again an opportunity for them to skewer a few orcs with their lances as things get a little bit more chaotic over here. Axemen of Lasarnak still doing their thing. Gondor infantry fighting to the death, and not surprising, it will be the death as well, considering Temple Executioners are here. Regular trebuchet shots, however, right into the centre of this Mordor force. Exactly what the Doctor ordered for Gondor. Heading towards the final 10,000 frames, though not within them yet, so we may be seeing, again, an example of that, where the final stand almost perfectly lines up with such a thing. The Gondorians, the unit of Sauron's will moving forward. There's still Olag High, and still those heavy Mordor units. We saw the beasts used to very good effect in the first layer, and indeed, even in the second layer they were also used well. Though I think all of them are dead on the field at this point, but this battle has been an ideal showcase of how they have improved, I think, in conjunction with Olag High and Blackguard of Barad-dûr. When used in conjunction with one another, it can make Mordor really, really scary, and it can allow them to claim the momentum in a very comprehensive manner, as we have seen. But without those things, if Gondor are allowed to get situated, their front lines have shown to be very, very resilient. And from a Gondorian perspective in this battle, we've also seen how effective they are with trebuchets, which is an intended thing. It is meant to be one of their focuses. That piece of artillery specifically, the kind of damage that it can dish out is big. It's one of the things that Gondor, I think, are going to have to be dependent upon in sieges such as this. And again, centre mass there, plenty of kills. They're going to need yet more of that. Pelagia Marines on the way forward, the Pinnith Galans blocking the path to the trebuchet, once again being used as a rear guard, so kind of an unorthodox use of a cavalry unit throughout this fight, but it's been pretty effective nonetheless. And I think that's it. The trebuchet has utilised all of its ammunition, so now the crew is going to attempt to leave and be a part of the final stand, or maybe a rear guard to allow other such units to leave. The frames starting to take a bit of a nosedive as Mordor clump their units up. And the vets of Osgiliath, I'm going to assume that they're still locked morale. I don't think I've heard anything about that changing, so it makes them very useful in this kind of situation. Even when it's very clear that they aren't going to be victorious in a fight, they will stand and fight to the bitter end and buy you a little bit of time to reposition yourself, reorganise everything. As the Peneth Galens are still alive. I don't really know if the Peneth Galens are going to be all that useful in the final stand. I mean, having a look back here at what Gondor have left, they've got a unit of Vanguard King Elisar, which is good. Veterans of Osgiliath, with their bows still drawn, but locked morale as well. There's Fountain Guard, Nimlothi and Honour Guard, so some high quality stuff back here. Not really a lot of the rank and file remains, but a decent spike of quality. I think the problem is going to be that Mordor's numbers are maybe a little bit too much. Morgul Chosen, they've still got some of their really high-end stuff as well, like there's still some Nazgul left alive in Temple Guard, which I think it's going to be a little bit too much for the Gondorians. But this is going to be a battle where fine margins are very much at work as we make our way to the final 10,000. The only fight that is still ongoing is this one, and it's not really a fight so much as it is a massacre, with the veterans of Osgiliath being killed by the black Númenóreans and lowly orcs that surround them. And that is going to be that, I believe. Well, the Sauron's Will over here, the gate is still open. Technically speaking, the fight continues as this one Axeman moves in. Will he be able to kill off any of these Marines before they surround him? He knocked that guy over, but the rest of the unit very much activated. I was worried actually that the battle was, or the replay was going to crash there, which would have been most unfortunate. Again, this is not the first time we've seen this, a unit of Axemen of the Sarnak fighting in a breach alone against a depleted Mordor force, which is just here to keep the engagement ticking over. Athelian Rangers trying to flee, but getting chopped at by the Sauron's Will as they do. So what are they to do? What are they doing now? Siege towers moving forward. Can pick up those ladders once again, which were used to good effect over on this choke point over here. They don't have any rams nearby by the looks of things, which means if that gate does close, it will be most unfortunate. I think we will actually go up to ×2 speed here as Mordor gather themselves for the final push. Oh no, they do have a ram. Turns out I was just blind, but now I see. Axemen in there as well, not a bad unit to have in the final stand either. A little bit more armour-piercing bite to be brought to bear against the orcs. But still, they gather their might. Having a look here, yeah, Uruk Chieftains, Temple Executioners, that's the thing. Like, if this was a force of Mordor that didn't have those quality spikes throughout their ranks, you would actually feel fairly good about Gondor's chances here. But because it does, quality is the sort of thing that Gondor need the advantage in this sort of situation, and it's not something that you can really say comprehensively, and so I think the numbers discrepancy in Mordor's favour is just going to be a little bit too high for them to deal with. As the Temple Executioners chant as the ram gets in place. Let's see. It is interesting that the Peneth Galens are still alive. Difficult map to use them on, and like I said, they have been used unconventionally. We actually do have an engagement. Some of the orcs getting up onto the walls, trying to prevent the Pelagia Marines from using their javelins in the manner that Gondor may like. Olag High up on the walls as well, so Uruk Infantry and Olag High together will be able to overcome the Marines. Axemen over there. The gates have fallen, but Mordor, are they ready? Are they going to flood forwards? It does look as though they are. Nimlothians. I really like the new model for the Nimlothians, I have to say. The shield. I like the slightly more, the slightly sleeker helmet design and the white capes. Very, very good. Blackguard of Barad-dûr in the vanguard once again. Mordor stuttering a little bit as they make their way through the gates, but they'll get there in the end, I'm sure. Must be hard to teach orcs what basic directionality is. But finally, here we are. Haven't really seen the Nimlothians in a fight in this battle so far. Maybe as part of a cluster of units where it was all rather indistinct, but this is it once again. The frame rate is struggling a bit. If this is what every battle is like where Mordor come forward in a great big mass, that's going to be rather unfortunate, given that it's going to be one of their main methods for getting through a defensive position. But it is what it is, I suppose. Oof. God, that frame rate's terrible. I don't know what's causing that. Individual units, maybe? When you don't look at the engagement, it's... ugh. Yeah, that's terrible. That's an example of actually a situation that I haven't encountered in quite some time, where I have to go away from the battle as far as I can and then go up to like ×6 speed or something to make it even remotely palatable, and that's unfortunate. Hopefully this isn't something which persists in other such situations. I mean, fortunately, I suppose we are within the end of the battle, but that is unfortunate. That wasn't something that happened during the actual battle itself either. I think there is a factor at play, which I do know about, which was one of the players did crash, a incidental player, one of the Mordor players crashed at this point in time, and I think actually, now that I think about it, players crashing was the cause of this sort of frame rate destruction when it happened in the distant past as well. That is something worth bearing in mind, I think, for the future, maybe. Because this is obviously no good. But it is what it is, I suppose. You can see Mordor moving forwards, being surrounded on all sides by the Gondorians. And if this becomes too bad, I will simply need to skip ahead to the final screen, I suppose, which is unfortunate. This isn't how I wanted this finale to go, to be honest. It was a finely poised final confrontation, but there's not really much else to be done here. Very, very unfortunate. You can see the Olag High moving in. That is the flanking moves that Mordor can make. Veterans of Osgiliath are still there as well. So this is pretty much the shape of the engagement as it will be until the end of the battle, really. Mordor with the ability to somewhat circumvent the situation by getting up onto the walls, which is of course the key behind this one. It is what is ultimately going to make Gondor's job a bit of an impossibility. The quality and the fight on the ground here is finely poised because Gondor have that surround, but because Mordor can go around this position and start hitting them from the rear, it is how Mordor ultimately put this battle beyond the Gondorians, and Mordor will ultimately go on to be victorious in this one. But yeah, there's really not much else I can say, unfortunately. So I think we're going to have to place a cap on replays from the new patch where someone crashes before the end, because this kind of effect is kind of unacceptable for replays as we move forward. So that's going to have to be the situation, I fear. So yeah, I think I'll rejoin when we get down to the final 1,000 frames at the very least, because there's not much else I can say. Okay, so we're going to rejoin here because the frames do seem to have stabilised themselves significantly, especially when we go back down to 1 speed, but naturally the Mordor flank from over here with some quality units led by some Uruk chieftains was the ultimate cause of this Gondorian front line collapsing, so we will get to see at least the final stand. I've no idea what caused that frame drop. It's a little bit concerning though, because I distinctly remember that happening with a couple of replays in the past. I hope that it doesn't prove to be a regular occurrence, but I do believe it is tied into when a player crashes before the end and the game doesn't like it. I seem to remember that being the case. So yeah, it's one of those situations I think where if there are crashes of any sort, it's going to have to be viewed with a little bit of suspicion as a replay. I think that is going to have to be the mindset moving forward, unfortunately. But as a replay, this one was still finely contested, a very nice theme as well, and we did get to see the updated version of CAIR ANDROS, one of many of the classic maps which has been given a significant uplift in terms of its design, I think, in the upcoming patch. Again, I just hope that we can use shader version 2 on maps like this moving forward, so that the full visual fidelity is something that I can showcase. And I do not know what the next one that they intend to allow me to show is, now that we've seen the Ravanian capital, Dol Guldur, and CAIR ANDROS. We'll ruminate on that a little bit more at the end of the battle, as we now see the final vestiges of the Gondorian resistance here overcome in the town centre. And CAIR ANDROS once more falls under Sauron's sway. I mean, this is pretty much all that you see that is left of Mordor, so I mean, there are some high quality units in here like Temple Executioners and Uruk Chieftains, so it's a decent margin of victory for Mordor, but in terms of sheer numbers, based on the huge forces that they had at their disposal at the start, I think the Gondorians did rather well, especially given the difficult start to proceedings that they had, but again, we'll talk about that in the end game splash screen, I feel. And there we have it. I think that's it for the Gondor. Well, no, there is still one. The reason he's taking so long to die as well is because it's only orc javelins that are trying to shank him to death. One Temple Executioner simply watches. Each swing of that sword is very likely to bring about his demise, however. And there we go. Finished. And that is going to be that. So there we have it. Indeed, exactly 10% the differential as well. So there we go. So yeah, that was an interesting one. A bit of a shame about those frames towards the end, as I said, but there's not really much to be done about that now. But it is something worth, at least my consideration moving forward, is that if there are crashes in the battle replay, even if they don't affect the outcome of the battle at all, like in this one it really didn't. Like one of the Mordor players that did crash didn't really have anything left anyway. So it really didn't affect the outcome too harshly. So yeah, the chances of me getting a replay where someone crashes for that reason is relatively low, because obviously under normal circumstances it does greatly affect the outcome, and people don't want me to show battles like that have been effectively changed too harshly, but we'll see. It's the sort of thing worth keeping an eye on anyway. But the battle as a whole, obviously very hotly contested, like I said. Good showcase of CAIR ANDROS as a map as well. A better design than the previous one, I think. Certainly mechanically, for both the defenders and the attackers to get to grips with. We also got to see many of Mordor and Gondor's strengths, actually. Gondor with their ability to hold a line, and in particular their artillery gameplay, which is going to be key into the next patch with their trebuchet focus, and Mordor with their brute strength as well. Yeah, great shield infantry, trolls, but in particular the Beasts of Gorgoroth. That kind of unit is now significantly more powerful in this version of the game, whereas before they were next to useless, really. They were almost always a waste of money. Now they are going to be pretty much universally, at the very least, able to break even in terms of what they're able to accomplish. And they do represent obviously quite a terrifying thing to behold if you're a defender and you're having to witness such things barreling towards you. It goes to show as well that such units being useful in a siege-like situation as well, as a living battering ram really, is also something worth bearing in mind for the future. And it will also be interesting when we see Harad in action, I'm sure, when the Mumakil takes the field once more. As for the next replay that they give me to showcase as far as an updated map goes, I'm not sure. I know that they've been running a few battles recently, but I'm not sure what the next one will be. I know that there is an updated Moria kicking around, so that is a candidate perhaps for the next one that we may see. As far as the next patch goes, it is also worth bearing in mind as well that I will probably be this will be the last new patch preview that gets shown for a couple of weeks at least, because I'll be away for work, so I won't be able to react as quickly to get the new patch stuff out as fast as maybe would be ideal. But still, we've had a couple in quick succession with updated maps, so that's good. Having a look at what did the damage and what did the business for both sides, for the Gondorians and for Mordor. Mordor with relatively even kill spreads, we'll get to see what did the business for them in a moment. Speculating on what did the business for Gondor, certainly the trebuchets, obviously the archers. I think where the battle was ultimately lost for Gondor was actually in the first moments really. The first layer did not go well for the Gondorians, and they were always trying to recover from that, and they did a very good job at doing so in the second layer, but not to the same extent that Mordor were able to bully them in the first. And you can see here that when a defender has the lowest amount of kills on the battlefield, that's not really a reflection on how Tundra's played as such, it's more how they decided to set up on the first layer, and he was clearly the one to bear the brunt of Mordor's fury in that regard. It's unfortunate, but again, if you're not ready for that kind of thing, then Mordor are going to exploit you, and that's exactly what we saw here. Still, we'll see what did the damage for Mordor as well. Eclipse, the Nazgul, getting a very healthy kill count for themselves over the long haul in this battle, and that's what the Nazgul do. You won't see them sort of barreling through lines or being big and, you know, theatrical as it were, like the Beasts of Gorgoroth or the Olag High or even some of the other infantry units, because they're so small as a unit. They blend in, but over the long haul, getting 253 kills on Gondorian defenders is a very good return. Uruk Chieftains and Temple Executioners decent. The Temple Guard for Eclipse maybe a little bit more disappointing. Olag High and Blackguard, part of that triumvirate of really aggressive units that we said before. The Troll Catapult doing nicely as well, actually, with kills at range and in melee. But those Beasts of Gorgoroth, 450 kills for an attacker on a single unit is extremely impressive, and it's the sort of thing which, as the defenders, you can't really reconcile with yourselves. We'll see what the other beasts did, but if it's a universal truth that they did extremely well, 2 times was the only army that didn't have any Beasts of Gorgoroth in it, but still a few units breaking 200, including the Nazgul once again, and the Olag High, and the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. And then Tommy the Wise, having a look, yeah, Beasts of Gorgoroth, 522 kills. Again, similar kind of kill spreads here, and with Froggy as well. His Beasts of Gorgoroth with less, but still. I think that is the truth that we can take away from this battle replay, is that the Nazgul do very well in a more covert sense, but what really sets Mordor apart now is their ability to go for Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Olag High and Beasts of Gorgoroth. You know, all 3 of them together make for a terrifying force, which is almost like an avalanche really, and then obviously Mordor can follow through with a bunch of basic Uruks to really consolidate any gains they may make with such pushes. I would argue the fact that maybe the Blackguard of Barad-dûr don't need to be good in melee, because I know that the Great Shield infantry units have been made a little bit better in melee. I would argue, given the fact that there are 200 of them, if they maintain that unit size, I would suggest they actually need to be quite poor in melee, maybe worse than they used to be, just because we've seen how brutally effective Mordor's pushes can be in this battle replay. I don't think the Blackguard need to be good in melee either. Or you can make the unit smaller, which basically means that they can be as effective as we saw here, but they are the star that burns twice as bright, burns half as long, that sort of thing. Yeah, that would be my maybe recommendation for Mordor in this sort of situation, because I know that Mordor are considered extremely powerful in this current version of the test build, so I'm sure that some of the stuff they have will be revised down a little bit, and I think that the Blackguard of Barad-dûr represent maybe the most obvious candidate for that, given what we've seen here. But overall, it was a close enough battle. I mean, Gondor could very well have won that, and again, you could say that their main strength in terms of their artillery could have been enough to turn this battle around, but that first layer was just a little bit too much for them to deal with. So yeah, that's going to be it. I will stop rambling for now, Big thank you to Eclipse for sending this one to me, and a big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay, and obviously to the developers for making the patch. But yeah, like I said, I don't know what the next new battle on the new patch is going to be, because I'm going to be away for work following the completion of this recording for at least a couple of weeks. So maybe in the interim I will get another replay from the new patch to showcase, but we won't be seeing that sadly until later on into November, so in basically a month's time at the earliest. But there's plenty of replays in the interim between then and now. And yeah, other than that, we'll have to wait and see. Also, towards the end of November, start of December, like I've said, it's intended for me to do some sort of live stream channel update, and maybe we can also talk about some of the stuff in the new patch, maybe go through a couple of rosters as a sort of 2-for-1 kind of live stream there, but we'll see. It's the sort of thing which is constantly in flux, as most things this year sadly have been. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.